Hello everyone, this is Alicia Walton and I'm going to be reviewing Chapter 8, Analyzing and Synthesizing Ideas in the Allen and Bacon textbook. If you'd like to follow along, the print copy is page 177. I believe it's the same for the digital copy of the text as well. So as we keep moving forward in the semester, you're going to be asked, as you are within many of your college courses, to take in information from multiple sources and analyze it and then synthesize that information together and then provide your own analysis or perspective on the matter. And I know that sounds like a lot right now. So for those of you who may not be familiar with analysis and synthesis, but I'm going to be going over it. So by the end of this lecture, you should understand a bit more about what those terms mean. So engaging in analysis and synthesis, one of the things you can do to introduce yourself to the concept is, if you want to read, you can pause and read it if you'd like, the engaging analysis and synthesis section at the bottom of 177. If you'd like, you could also read page 178, the book review in Publishers Weekly, and the ground rules for Boomerang Kids. So within both of these pieces, the textbook asks you to summarize the main points in each of these short stories or short nonfiction pieces. They also ask you to identify the rhetorical features. So in identifying the rhetorical features, you need to consider audience, purpose, and genre. And you need to figure out which one of these stand out in each piece as you read them. So after looking at all of this, if we were in an in-class scenario in person, I'd ask for all of you to share your responses, and we would talk about what each of you found so that you could understand what your version of a summary is in comparison with another person's version of a summary. So a summary is a brief statement of points. And analysis is a methodical examination that goes into detail. So if I'm going to analyze the Publishers Weekly book review on page 178 of our textbook, I'm going to review it, I'm going to read it, I'm going to review it, and then I'm going to examine it methodically. And I'm going to look at the specific details of this piece. An example of analyzing would be actually answering the questions at the top of page 179, like I asked you to do before. So providing a summary isn't necessarily analyzing, but looking for the rhetorical features that stand out in the piece would be an analysis. You would be analyzing it for rhetorical features. So that's what an analysis is. And last but not least, a synthesis is a combination of ideas. So we are asked to provide a summary of the Publishers Weekly book review, which a summary is the main points of the piece, right? A collection of main points that we found that cover the material within it. Then if we analyze it, an example of analyzing that piece would be looking for the rhetorical features such as audience, purpose, genre, etc. And then a synthesis would be if we read both Ground Rules for Boomerang Kids and the book review and brought them together, right? So I'm not going to go into great detail on both of those, But let's just say, for example, in summarizing each of those, you find that they each have a summary point that they share. And you present that as a finding. That would be called synthesizing. That's synthesizing an idea. Synthesizing, it's just bringing ideas together or bringing things together. Okay, so let's move on. Again, back to page 179. If you look at understanding, analysis, and synthesis, the second sentence of the first paragraph, when you analyze something, you break it down into parts, you see the relationships among them. When you synthesize, you take one more step and you put them together. So there's another definition of those two things. An analysis is an examination, but it's also taking something down into basic parts. It's breaking something down into parts. That synthesis is pulling things together. So they're kind of the opposite in a way, right? Pulling apart, taking, and bringing together. A second useful, if you move on to the second paragraph, first sentence, the second useful way to look at synthesis is a dialectical critical thinking process. And one of the things you need to keep in mind throughout your college career is that you're often going to be given a significant question that when you start a paper, whether it's a science course, a business course, or a composition course, you're going to be given a significant question to pursue and think about, and possibly, write anywhere from a page to 10 pages about. And depending on the purpose of that paper, you might have to both analyze and synthesize or do one or the other. Synthesis is an especially important component of academic research writing, where you use synthesis to carve out your own thinking space on a question. You use it to carve out your own, not just your own thinking space, but you begin to form your own perceptions and your own opinions. And it gives you the opportunity to wrestle with concepts or texts. So, and really in many English classes, I'm not sure about your science classes, but in an English class and also in history classes and social sciences, it's considered a good thing to put competing ideas against one another and to consider opposite sides of a topic and that sort of thing. And this allows you that kind of space to do that. So going on to page 180, if you look at the section at the bottom of the page, you'll see a list of texts to be analyzed and possible synthesis questions. So the first one is a chapter from Gary Chamberlain's Troubled Waters, Religion, Ethics, and the Global Water Crisis. It's a great title. And one of the questions that the textbook authors give us is, who owns our water? Should water be a human right or a commodity? That's a good question, isn't it? It's a great possible synthesis question because it's bringing together more than one concept or idea. It's bringing together pieces. And these kinds of questions will help you form arguments and writing strategies and argument strategies within your other courses. So if you go on to 181, the bottom of 181, the textbook tells us a little bit about what a typical synthesis essay looks like, and it's good to know this. So they usually contain a statement of synthesis question that shows your interest in the text, and it also presents a problem. It also should present short summaries of texts so that when you're giving a synthesis, you're also giving the audience an understanding of what you're synthesizing. So I'm bringing together these two great ideas, and they come from two different books, but what are those books about? So you're going to have to give me a summary. So that's how summary plays into analyzing and synthesizing. Moving on to 182, they give some more. They give us some more examples of synthesis questions and possible readings and images to look at. And you can see, I think some of this is in our text actually that you can look at, but it's always referenced very neatly. So understanding the components of synthesis thinking and writing is an important part of creating that essay. You want to make sure that you introduce whatever works that you're discussing so that you can then present the ideas that you're trying to synthesize. You also want to make sure that you, as the top of 183 points out, you want to make sure that you're summarizing the texts in a way that you can still explore their ideas. So I can write a summary about the Publishers Weekly book review that we were talking about at the beginning of the chapter. It's very brief, or I can write one, that's instead of 3 lines, maybe 6 lines long, so that I introduce something before I actually argue about it. So the point of that is you want to make sure you properly introduce something before you argue about it or present an idea and where it came from. I also highly encourage you to read Rosie Evans' summary of Robin Marantz-Heinig's article on the bottom of page 183 if you haven't done so already. That's a good text to look at. So next up, let's talk about analyzing text. So we've talked about how to summarize. We've talked about the importance of summarizing before we synthesize. Now we're on to analyzing. Why is it important to analyze the rhetorical features of a text? Well, if you'll recall, a couple of weeks ago I talked about ethos, pathos, and logos. And you use those to analyze the author's use of audience and her other tactics for writing in Nickel and Dined. And that was your requirement for the text in action assignment. Now, why did I ask you to do that? Or why did Ms. Coster and I ask you to do that? We asked you to do that because we want you to be able to look at a piece of work and try to understand what the author's aims were in creating that work. No matter who is writing what, they are likely to have some kind of aim or goal in mind as pertaining to audience. Sometimes it's just purely self-expression. Maybe poetry is the outside of the norm for that rule. But every author has an end game or a goal in mind, and every author is trying to persuade you in some way, shape, or form. Many people, they'll say, "Oh, I'm not trying to get you to do anything. I'm not trying to get." Everyone is trying to persuade you to do something. So what is it they're trying to persuade you to do? At the very least, they want you to read their book, right? And there's nothing wrong with persuasion. Persuasion isn't a dirty word. Rhetoric isn't a dirty word. It only is if you make it such. But we want you to consider why people are presenting you with the information that they are. It makes a big difference. Sometimes it makes an absolutely huge difference. So page 185, back to the text. If you look at the middle of the page, you'll see questions to ask to examine rhetorical features in each text. And this is a list of good questions to ask when you are examining the rhetorical features of a piece. First one is, who is the author? To whom is the author writing and why? What is the motivating occasion? So with the question of who is the author, is it going to make a difference if Barbara Einrich is a wealthy billionaire, or if she comes from a background where her mother was a waitress and her father was a janitor. Is that going to make a big difference to you? Is that going to make a big difference in her her aim in her writing? Going on down the list here, we have further on, how fair, reliable, knowledgeable, and authoritative does the author appear to be? Sometimes you have authors who are presenting information and it's just their opinion. But you need to be able to tell the difference and actively engage and know the difference between something that's an opinion versus something that is a fact. And there's nothing wrong with buying into someone's opinion. But you have to know the difference between an opinion and a fact, and whether or not they're presenting something as an opinion and a fact, or a fact to you. Going along, if you look at page 189, going further into analysis, in the middle of the page, the authors have listed differences between two articles. One is Hoenig, and the second is Scammed Hard. And in each piece, we see the differences between the two. And the authors make a conscious decision to analyze and ask those rhetorical questions we just talked about. I won't go over each of those. I know that you all know how to read, so I won't read to you too much here. And that little chirping sound was what you heard with my battery. I didn't just turn into like some kind of Seahawk or something. And you know, normally I'd edit that out, but I'm kind of curious as to who makes it to minute 17. I'll find out. Alright. Well, with all of that said, I think we've covered the main points that we'd like you to focus on. So keep reading the book. I specifically want you to pay attention to pages 194 and 195. Think about writing a thesis for a synthesis essay and what those can look like at both the low level and the high level sentences. That's a great way to look at that as far as an example and having a framework for what a synthesis essay looks like. As always, oh, there's my second chirp. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Happy reading.